Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the RETRO-MENINGO study. Now, this is a really important paper because it basically takes our classic definition of invasive meningococcal disease in the ICU and says, hold on, we're getting this wrong. It uses a huge data set to argue that we're not dealing with one disease, but two very different ones with completely different outcomes.
And the authors really don't waste any time getting to the point. Right from the start, they highlight this central problem. For years, we've used IMD as this big umbrella term. But what this quote tells us is that this broad label has just been causing a ton of confusion, lumping patients together who, as we're about to see, are on totally different clinical tracks. This study is all about fixing that.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the main question they're asking. Then we'll look at how they designed the study to answer it. We'll get into the two distinct patient types they identified, look at the shocking differences in mortality, and wrap up with what this all means for those of us working in the ICU. Okay, first up, let's really set the stage. Let's talk about this core problem, this long-standing habit we have of treating two very different presentations as if they're the same thing. So when a patient with IMD gets sick enough to land in the ICU, they usually show up in one of two ways. You have the classic purulent meningitis, a brain and spinal cord infection. And then you have the hemodynamic form, what we often call meningococemia or purpura fulminans. This is just a brutal, fast-moving septic shock. The whole point of this study is that we tend to mash these two together. And that, as you'll see, is a huge mistake when it comes to figuring out who's really in trouble. All right, so to really prove that these are two different beasts, the investigators needed a ton of data. So they designed this massive nationwide study. Let's take a look at the nuts and bolts of how they did it. You know, for a relatively rare disease, this is a really powerful setup. Sure, it's retrospective, but look at the scale of it. Data from over 100 French ICUs, spanning 9 years. That gives you a lot of statistical power, and they were smart about it. They only included patients with microbiologically proven IMD, and they used a really solid primary outcome, death at day 60. It makes the findings super robust. Okay, this right here is probably the most important slide for understanding the whole paper. It's so simple, but so brilliant. The researchers made a clean cut right from the get-go. They just asked, why was this patient admitted to the ICU? Was it because of their brain, a change in mental status, a coma? Or was it because of their blood pressure, hypotension, and shock? This one single distinction is the key that unlocks everything else. So after screening patients across the country, they ended up with a final group of 654 adults. For a disease this severe, that's a really substantial number. It gives the study more than enough power to reliably compare these subgroups and figure out what's really driving mortality.
And here's what that cohort looked like when they split it up. You can see that a clear majority, about 2/3 of the patients, were admitted primarily for a neurological crisis. The other third or so came in because of hemodynamic collapse.
All right, so now we've got our two groups. Let's get to the juicy part and look at the results. Let's see just how different these two patient populations really were. I mean, the data just paints a picture of two totally different patients. The neurologic group, they tended to be younger, came in complaining of a headache, and usually had serogroup B. The hemodynamic group, on the other hand, was older, showed up with that classic purpuric rash, and was more often linked to serogroup W. And look at this. They got to the ICU way faster, a median of just 1 day. They get sick, and they get sick fast. And if the clinical picture wasn't clear enough, the lab work just screams it. Look at these numbers, all with p-values that are incredibly significant. The hemodynamic group had their platelets wiped out, they were in profound shock with a lactate of 5.4, their inflammatory markers were through the roof, and they were already in significant kidney failure. We're not talking about subtle little differences here. These labs showed two completely different things happening inside the body. So we've got these dramatic differences in how patients present and what their labs look like. That obviously leads us to the most important question of all. Did it actually change their outcome? And here you have it. This is really the money slide of the whole study. The mortality rate at day 60 for the hemodynamic group was over 25%. For the neurologic group, it was under 5%. That is a staggering, more than 5-fold difference in the risk of dying. It's hard to overstate how significant that is. You can really see why that mortality gap is so huge when you look at the kind of support these patients needed. The hemodynamic group was just getting hammered. Almost 80% of them needed vasopressors to keep their blood pressure up. Over a quarter of them ended up on dialysis. And just look at this last line, limb amputations, a devastating complication that happened to more than 10% of the hemodynamic group and 0% of the neurologic group. It's just a different world of sickness. So when they ran the big statistical analysis to control for all the other factors, that hemodynamic presentation still came out on top as the #1 independent predictor of death. It quadrupled the odds of dying. Age and lactate were right up there too. And here's something interesting. Having no comorbidities was also a risk factor, which might suggest that a dysregulated, over-the-top immune response in healthy people is actually part of the problem. But it wasn't all bad news. Buried in all these risk factors for bad outcomes, the analysis found one single intervention that made a huge, huge difference for survival. And this is just so critical for all of us. Getting a third-generation cephalosporin on board before the patient even got to the ICU was powerfully protective. An odds ratio of 0.31 means it cut the odds of dying by nearly 70%. That is a massive effect, and it just hammers home how incredibly important it is to give the right antibiotics as early as humanly possible if you even suspect this disease. So let's tie all this together. What's the final verdict? What should we be taking away from this study and bringing to the bedside? Well, the conclusion couldn't be clearer. We have to stop thinking of IMD as one disease. The neurologic and hemodynamic types are just fundamentally different syndromes. They have different risk factors, different serogroups, and wildly different prognoses. Making that distinction is absolutely key for managing our patients correctly, and the data gives us a clear mandate. Get those antibiotics in early. It's one of the most powerful things we can do. And we'll end on this final, powerful quote from the authors. This isn't just a suggestion, it's really a call to action. They're telling us that for critically ill patients, we should probably retire the term IMD and instead use more precise language, like meningococcal symptosemia or meningococcal sepsis. It's a challenge for us to change our vocabulary to reflect a deeper, more accurate understanding of this disease, because in the end, that precision is what helps us treat the actual patient in front of us, not just some vague, misleading label.